Was Verne Gagne a hero, a villain, or something in between? By the end of this video, you decide. Let's explore the controversial life of a wrestling legend and his unfortunate end. Born in Minnesota in 1926, Verne Gagne was destined for greatness. He was a natural athlete, an amateur wrestling champion, and even a football player with dreams of going pro. But wrestling always called him back. After a short stint in the NFL, Verne got into professional wrestling, quickly making a name for himself as one of the best technical wrestlers in the business. But Verne wasn't just a wrestler, he was a visionary. In 1960, he co-founded the American Wrestling Association, based in his home state of Minnesota. The AWA became a hotbed for talent, launching the careers of legends like Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and Jesse Ventura. As the owner and promoter of the AWA, Verne held immense power. He controlled not only the matches, but also the destinies of the wrestlers. And it was here, at the height of his success, that the seeds of his downfall were sown. Verne Gagne was notoriously stubborn, a man who believed he knew best. This translated into a rigid booking style where he often refused to job, or as you'd say, lose to other wrestlers, even when it made sense for the storyline or the company's growth. This inflexibility led to clashes with several wrestlers, most notably Hulk Hogan. Hogan, sensing his growing popularity, wanted a run with the AWA World Heavyweight Championship, but Gagne, reluctant to put the young star over, refused. Hogan left the AWA in 1983, eventually finding superstardom in Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. But as the saying goes, nothing lasts forever. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the wrestling world was changing fast. The rise of cable television and pay-per-view created new opportunities for promotions to expand their reach, and one man saw the potential like no other: Vince McMahon. This shift created a huge challenge for Verne Gagne. His traditional approach to wrestling suddenly felt outdated. Fans weren't just looking for technical matches anymore. They wanted drama, spectacle, and personalities. And Verne, he wasn't willing to adapt. And so the world saw the end of AWA. After the AWA's closure, Verne largely stepped away from the public eye. But in 2009, a heartbreaking event brought him back into the headlines. And before we get into it, let me tell you, this one was his biggest controversy ever. It was January 26, 2009. By then, Verne was 82 years old and living in a nursing care facility in Bloomington, Minnesota. His health had taken a turn. He was battling dementia, a condition that was slowly stealing his memories and altering his behavior. Now here's where the story gets hard to hear. Verne got into an altercation with another resident at the facility, a 97-year-old man named Helmut Gutmann. What exactly happened that day isn't entirely clear. According to Helmut's widow, who by the way wasn't there at the time, Verne picked Helmut up, threw him to the floor, and pulled back on his body, breaking his hip. But the police later described it differently. They said it was more of a push and a shove. Whatever the specifics, the result was tragic. Helmut fell, was hospitalized, and just a few weeks later, he passed away from complications. After Helmut Gutmann's passing on February 14, 2009, the Hennepin County Medical Examiner officially ruled his death a homicide. It was a decision that sent shockwaves through the community. A legendary wrestler had been involved in an altercation that led to the death of a 97-year-old man. At the center of it all was a heartbreaking question. Should Verne Gagne face criminal charges? The first thing prosecutors had to consider was Verne's mental state. For Verne, dementia meant he likely had no recollection of the incident at all. Both Verne and Helmut reportedly didn't remember what had happened that day. That alone complicated the situation. How do you assign blame when someone can't understand their actions or the consequences? From a legal perspective, intent matters. For a crime like assault or manslaughter to result in charges, there needs to be evidence that the person understood what they were doing and acted deliberately. The prosecutors reviewed the case carefully. They consulted with medical experts, legal advisors, and likely even the families involved. Ultimately, they announced their decision. Verne Gagne would not face criminal charges. You see, Verne's dementia wasn't just a random twist of fate. Many believed it was tied to his wrestling career, a condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, caused by repeated head injuries. Wrestling had given Verne everything: fame, fortune, a place in history. But it had also taken its toll. By 2015, Verne's health had continued to decline. He had spent his last years surrounded by family, living with his daughter Beth and her husband Will. For his loved ones, it was a bittersweet time. They were grateful to care for him in his final years, but they also had to witness the heartbreaking toll dementia had taken on this once vibrant man. Even as his memories faded, there were still moments when glimpses of the old Verne shone through. Sometimes it was a smile that reminded his family of the man who had once commanded arenas full of cheering fans. Sometimes it was a moment of recognition or a story from his wrestling days that brought a little light back into the room. But dementia is relentless. Over time, it became clear that Verne was nearing the end of his journey. On April 27, 2015, in Bloomington, Minnesota, the wrestling legend passed away at the age of 89. Verne's passing marked the end of an era. He was more than a wrestler, he was a trailblazer, a man who transformed professional wrestling and left an indelible mark on the industry. Fans from all over the world mourned his loss, sharing stories of his incredible matches, his dedication to the sport, and the memories he gave them. If you've ever lost someone you love, you know that the final goodbye is never easy. For Verne's family, those last moments were undoubtedly filled with love, grief, and a sense of gratitude for the time they had shared. His family knew that, even though his body was frail and his mind had faded, Verne's spirit, the spirit of a champion, would live on. And as they said goodbye, they knew he had left behind a legacy that would be remembered forever. As an attempt to make his legacy timeless here, we have his amazing, impeccable, and happening career that made him better than everyone in the game. Let's get into it. Verne was born in Corcoran, Minnesota, and grew up on a farm in Robbinsdale. Life wasn't easy for him. He lost his mother when he was just 14 years old. After that, Verne left home and had to figure things out on his own. But even at a young age, he had this incredible drive. In high school, he found his place on the wrestling mat and became a state champion not just once, but twice, in 1942 and 1943. Those wins set the tone for what would become a lifetime of success in wrestling. After high school, Verne went to the University of Minnesota, where he was recruited to play football. He played both defensive end and tight end, but he didn't stop wrestling. He couldn't. Wrestling was his true passion, and as a freshman, he won the Big Ten wrestling title at 175 pounds. And get this, he pulled it off after coming back from serving in the Marine Corps during World War II. That's right, Verne wasn't just dominating sports. He also served his country. One of his most famous matches was in 1949 when he beat Dick Hutton, who was already a two-time national champion. The match ended in a 1-1 tie, but Verne was declared the winner because he controlled most of the action. That's just the kind of wrestler he was. Relentless and always in control. Verne even came close to competing in the Olympics. In 1948, he was an alternate for the U.S. freestyle wrestling team after losing a tight match to eventual gold medalist Henry Wittenberg. He was set to compete in Greco-Roman wrestling instead, but at the last minute, the U.S. coaches decided not to field a team in that style. Can you imagine getting that close and then being told you're not going? It must have been frustrating, but Verne didn't let it slow him down. Around this time, Verne also dipped his toes into professional football. He was drafted by the Chicago Bears in 1947 and even played briefly with the Green Bay Packers. But there was a catch. Bears owner George Halas gave him an ultimatum: football or wrestling. Back then, believe it or not, wrestling paid better, so Verne chose the mat over the field. And honestly, thank goodness he did, because that decision changed the wrestling world forever. In 1949, Verne made his professional wrestling debut in Texas, and right from the start, he was a star. His first match was a win, with boxing legend Jack Dempsey as the referee. Talk about a grand entrance. By 1950, Verne had already won the NWA Junior Heavyweight Championship, and soon after, he became one of the most popular wrestlers on television. Wrestling fans couldn't get enough of his technical skills, and he became one of the highest-paid wrestlers of the era, making around $100,000 a year, a fortune at the time. But Verne wasn't content just being a wrestler. In 1960, he decided to start his own promotion, the American Wrestling Association, or AWA. Back then, most of the wrestling world was controlled by the National Wrestling Alliance, but Verne wasn't afraid to break away. He built the AWA into one of the biggest promotions in the country, with himself as the first world champion. And he wasn't just a paper champion. He backed it up in the ring, defending his title against some of the best wrestlers of all time. Over the years, Verne had legendary feuds with names like The Crusher, Mad Dog Vachon, and Nick Bockwinkel. His sleeper hold became one of the most feared finishing moves in wrestling, and his dominance as champion was unmatched. At one point, he held the AWA World Heavyweight Championship for 7 straight years. Can you imagine that? 7 years as the top guy. It's almost unheard of today. But Verne wasn't just focused on his own career. He was passionate about finding and developing new talent. Over the years, he helped launch the careers of legends like Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, and Sergeant Slaughter. The AWA became a breeding ground for some of the biggest names in wrestling, and Verne's influence was felt far beyond his own promotion. However, the wrestling world was changing. By the 1980s, larger-than-life characters like Hulk Hogan were taking over, and Verne's old-school approach started to feel out of step with the times. Hogan's departure from the AWA to the WWF marked a turning point, and the AWA struggled to compete. Despite the challenges, Verne stayed true to his vision, putting on shows that emphasized skill and technique over flash and spectacle. In the early 1980s, Verne Gagne, the owner of the American Wrestling Association, AWA, was at a crossroads with one of his biggest stars, Hulk Hogan. Gagne had big plans for Hogan, hoping to make him the top champion in his promotion after Hogan's feud with Nick Bockwinkel ended in April 1983. However, there was a catch. Gagne wanted to take a large portion of the revenue Hogan earned from merchandise and his matches in Japan, but Hogan wasn't having it. Hogan felt that he deserved more control over his earnings and refused Gagne's deal. As the year went on, Hogan found himself in a new opportunity. In late 1983, Vince McMahon, the owner of the WWF, World Wrestling Federation, made Hogan an offer he couldn't refuse. Hogan agreed to return to the WWF, leaving the AWA behind. There's a story that adds some drama to this whole situation. The Iron Sheik, a wrestler Gagne had trained, claimed that Gagne bribed him to hurt Hogan's knee on purpose, knowing that Hogan was planning to leave for the WWF. This rumor added fuel to the fire and made the already tense situation even worse. As Hogan made the jump to the WWF, a wave of other top stars from various wrestling territories, including the AWA, followed suit. McMahon had a vision to expand the WWF into a national powerhouse, moving away from the regional territories that had been the backbone of North American wrestling for decades. He wanted to make the WWF the dominant promotion across the country, and that's exactly what happened. Verne Gagne, unlike most of his peers, started pushing the AWA beyond its usual geographical limits. By September 1985, the AWA was getting national exposure on ESPN with AWA Championship Wrestling. For the first time, the promotion was getting some visibility on a larger scale, similar to what the WWF had been doing. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Gagne had hoped. ESPN wasn't particularly committed to the AWA's show. Sometimes the program wouldn't air at its usual time slot, or it would be preempted by other live sports events. This meant that many fans couldn't watch the show regularly, hurting the AWA's visibility. On top of these issues, Gagne's style of booking was becoming outdated. While the WWF was focusing on larger-than-life characters and entertainment, Gagne stuck to his traditional approach. He believed that his top stars should be skilled technical wrestlers, not just flashy personalities. This approach was in stark contrast to what McMahon was doing with the WWF, and it didn't resonate with fans the same way. Over time, Gagne's strategy led to the AWA losing most of its best talent to the WWF, and the promotion began to see a decline in both ratings and live attendance. By 1991, the AWA's days were numbered. The company, which had been a major player in the wrestling world for 3 decades, shut down. Gagne's legacy, while significant in the early days of American professional wrestling, was tarnished by the failure of the AWA. Unfortunately, Gagne's financial troubles didn't stop there. In the years that followed, he would end up filing for bankruptcy. Despite the end of his wrestling promotion, Gagne's contributions to the world of professional wrestling were recognized later in life. In 2006, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by his son, Greg Gagne. This made him one of only a few people to be inducted into the WWE, WCW, and Professional Wrestling Halls of Fame. It was a well-deserved acknowledgement of his impact on the industry. Then in 2018, Gagne was inducted in the Nebraska Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, further cementing his place in wrestling history. Despite the ups and downs in his career, Verne Gagne's influence on the wrestling world remains undeniable. In the end, all I can say is, our hero shaped the industry in ways few others could. As a wrestler, promoter, and founder of the AWA, he not only helped build the careers of legendary names like Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and Jesse Ventura, but also changed the landscape of wrestling itself. However, his refusal to adapt to the changing times and his stubbornness, particularly in his disputes with stars like Hogan, ultimately led to the decline of the AWA. Despite the challenges he faced, including the tragic and controversial incident in his later years, Verne's impact on the sport will never be forgotten. Verne's story is a reminder of the highs and lows that come with pursuing a dream. He gave everything to wrestling, but wrestling also took a toll on him. His legacy, while complicated by his later years, remains one of immense contribution, from his technical prowess in the ring to his dedication in shaping the future of the business. Verne Gagne will always be remembered as a true wrestling legend. If you enjoyed this dive into Verne Gagne's life and legacy, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories from the world of wrestling. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on Verne's impact on the wrestling world. What's your favorite memory or match of his? And don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching.